Welcome to a new episode of Energy Bites with ELS. It's Monday, the 17th of February, and this is the 7th episode of ELS Analysis weekly podcast Energy Bites, in which the ELS team discuss recent events, developments that is impacting energy markets and climate policies. I'm Elina Kinsey, and today I'm joined by my colleagues Shana Casas, Siddharth Iyer, and Carl Rosenberg to resume our last week's discussion on Europe's position in the world after the change of leadership in the US. In recent episodes, we've been discussing this issue with regards to Europe's competitiveness and the effect it could have on the green transition in terms of speed and ambitions. But today I'd like to focus more on energy security. During the past weekend, we heard very strong and direct messages from the US administration during the Munich Security Conference directed towards European countries. And even though these messages were not related to energy specifically, security and energy is very closely related in Europe, giving it strong dependence on energy imports. So I would like to talk about this from both a political, policy, and market perspective today, and start by posing a very broad question to all of you, namely, should we be worried? If I'll start with you, Carl, in terms of the political dynamic within Europe, would you say that the current feeling is that this is going to unite Europe, or does it more seem to prove a growing fragmentation within the Union and among European countries?
Well, I think JD Vance's speech annoyed most European leaders. It landed very harshly, and the response was harsh in return, most notably by the German defense minister Pistorius, who actually yelled out during the speech and then ran out to amend his speech to have a proper response. There was a harsh condemnation from Germany's Prime Minister Olaf Scholz as well, and from the European Foreign Commissioner Katja Kallas, who said that, listening to that speech, they tried to pick a fight with us, and we don't want to pick a fight with our friends. So there's definitely been a bit of fragmentation within the EU-US transatlantic relationship.
But would you say a fragmentation within EU as a whole among sort of national governments? But I would also like to hear what you think, like from a more political dynamic in terms of, different political parties, right wing, left wing, the middle, and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, there were some mixed responses. JD Vance said democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. And of course, that landed very nicely within Germany's AFD party, where Alice Weidel met with Vance on the sidelines of the security conference. AFD has previously gotten the nod from Musk, but now also met with the Vice President of the United States, and that meeting was reportedly held outside of the venue, as the far right party was barred from the event. We've also seen other reaction from France, for example, the president of Rassemblement National, Jordan Bardella. He described Vance's observations as quite lucid, stating something along the lines of there's an Orwellian drift of the left that advocates for a single thought. And then, of course, you had the Swedish Democratic leader who welcomed JD Vance's speech, Åkesson, who said that it was liberating to hear a person with the authority of the US vice president to lecture the European political elite. And he continued by saying that he's heard a number of truths that, the European people have needed to hear for a very long time. And of course, the idea of mass immigration, the idea of, standing up for freedom of speech, that resonates well with these types of parties. But I also want to highlight a point that JD Vance wanted to push on during his speech. He said, if you're running in fear of your own voters, there's nothing America can do for you. And that sentiment of an elite increasingly detached from the lived realities of ordinary citizens, that resonates very well with populist movements, both on the left but also on the right. They thrive on the narrative of a self-serving political class alienated from the concerns of the broader populace. And for an American vice president to sort of push that narrative in time of crisis, that is of course quite stressing.
Yeah, that is understandable that that's picked up in Europe as well. We are seeing populist movements around the world. But when you are seeing alienation of Europe from the global stage, or at least a weakening position, do you think the European as a whole will unite itself and try to come up with some kind of response that will increase or sort of improve their position in negotiations, not only when it comes to these hardcore security issues, but also when it comes to energy and other political sort of development that impacts the whole world?
Well, I mean, the European leaders have reacted very quickly following the events of this weekend. They are meeting today, and it will be very interesting to see what comes out of that meeting. The Swedish parliamentary parties were also called in by the foreign minister, and this is definitely something that the ELS analysis will follow. Both from political leaders, but also businesses. There might be a realignment of narratives. Will that be to sort of unite European interests, or will it be some sort of will we concede to the US's interests here?
Yeah, and that also goes along with the discussion we had last week about competitiveness, obviously. But I would like to turn to you now, Shana, and just ask on the sort of official EU level, do we have a strategy to use in a situation like this when we have a change in geopolitical situation? And as I mentioned in my introduction or when I started the podcast, that energy and security is very closely related in Europe. So could you just give us a little bit of a background to what's already existing in terms of strategies or a response that they could pick up in a situation like this?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, just saying that we know that defense is a hot topic for this new commission, besides competitiveness that we covered in our last podcast. And security of supply is indeed a way of defense, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And actually, I just wanted to point out that this was the first time that the electricity sector was present at this annual conference in Munich. Until this year, the discussions had centered around oil and gas only. And this can be seen as an expression of this dualism between the increased awareness for security of supply while also keeping up with the transition. But getting more into the topic and answering your question, I think that the main issue here is that the security of supply strategy from the EU is from 2014. And since the aggression on Ukraine, the Commission has been trying to end all Russian fossil fuel imports and aims to do so by 2027. But among all the new strategies and directives and action plans and strategies that the Commission wants to unveil in this legislative period, and that we mentioned in our last podcast and also in our platform, we don't find a new energy security strategy. And I think that's where the issue lays here. Actually, a spokesperson for the Commission said this week that this topic was included in the mission letter that was sent to the EU's new energy commissioner, Dan Jorgensen. But actually, if one looks at this letter, the Danish commissioner has been tasked with adapting the current security framework to, and I read, the geopolitical context and the electrification of the EU's energy system while paying close attention to emerging risks. And in my opinion, I don't think this is a call for a new energy security strategy. I do think that security of supply will be at the back of the minds of those who must legislate now. The Commission wants to ease the permitting processes, improve energy efficiency, more competitiveness, and of course, this will have an impact on security of supply at some point. But security of supply is not the main treated issue or the main addressed issue, and it should be. It should be directly addressed so that it can be treated in a holistic way and impact the other areas, but not the other way around.
Yeah, that's very interesting. A lot of things have changed since 2014. So I think and I think this will really, this new situation will really push for this, because the plan B, when we got sort of had to be less dependent on Russian gas, was to turn to the US. And now that also have, well, that hasn't really changed yet, but the power dynamic has certainly done so. So, in terms of that, Sid, could you just, give us a bit of a view on the market? So, how dependent is Europe? Sort of, if you give an example from the gas market, which has really been under scrutiny when it comes to all of these crises that we've been going through, can you just give us a view on sort of where do we stand at the moment in Europe when it comes to gas imports and our options to diversify?
Yes, of course, Yellen. So, focusing then on the gas markets, the EU is very much still dependent on imports. Over 50% of the total energy use of the EU is imported, and of course, gas is a major chunk of this. Now, before the energy crisis, Russia constituted nearly half of the EU's gas imports, but of course, now that has realigned, and Norway is the largest supplier to the EU, with the US being a significant chunk. Nearly half of the LNG coming to the EU is from the US. So we have developed another kind of dependency. But given the new geopolitical situation, that could change as well. The EU has, of course, been very proactive in searching for gas supplies elsewhere in the world, and that has been seen in long-term agreements between Germany and Qatar. So there are, of course, more suppliers out there for the EU to reach out to, but it must be noted that the rest of the world also does seek to purchase LNG, and that includes Asia, which has growing buying power and also the ability to sign those long term offtake agreements with Middle Eastern suppliers. And so the EU will have to be very proactive in its search for energy security. And while the first step uh, of the response to the energy crisis was very much a focus on local electricity generation, there is still a need within the EU for these imports at the moment. And that can also be a focus here. I would like to point out also that Eurelectric, which has represented the electricity system for the first time at the Munich Security Conference, has been vocal about the need for an updated energy security strategy. And for their part, they see diversifying supply chains for electricity generation as an important part of that. Although there are dependencies because many of the minerals required are processed in specific countries, Eurelectric sees that as manageable with the potential to mitigate. I think the key focus then is casting the nets wide and having backup supply chains, backup suppliers, regardless of whether it's renewable generation or fossil fuels.
Yeah, and on that note, I think it has a lot to do with timing, right? So, in the long term, yes, absolutely, we need to cut our dependency overall and just build up supply chains and our own capacity in Europe. But in the short term, we are still dependent on imports. And I think, from Europe's side, it's a long-term vision and it's a long-term plans that you are building all your actions and regulations upon. Whereas we have seen now with the new US administration that's rather very responsive, and we usually call him a transactional president, but that also means that it's very short term in the way he's thinking about things and the strategy that they are implementing, which is not really at all in line with the European long term vision. So here I think Europe needs to adopt to this new situation where you need to have short term crisis plans and action plans for how to deal with the current situation, but still not losing sight or focus on the long term. And here lies a conflict, I think, and this is something that we are struggling with completely, fully see also how to navigate this. But I think this will be the key issue for most of the energy companies and energy stakeholders in Europe going forward. So I like on that note to just finish up this podcast for this week by just asking each and one of you, as always, what you will keep your eye on for the coming week.
Yes, so as I've said many times on our podcast and as we're covering in our platform, this commission's period, even if looking to deregulate, will be very legislative heavy. And of course, energy security will be on the heads of those who legislate. So even if there's not a planned new security of supply strategy, I am sure we will keep hearing about it in the regulatory sphere.
Thank you, Carl.
I sort of alluded to it earlier already. You know, it will be crucial to watch how the narrative evolves after today's meeting in Paris. You know, both political leaders and businesses could signal important shifts and, you know, break from the current consensus that has been established since 2022. So pinpointing which market actors, which politicians will be, you know, diverting from that shared messaging, that will be crucial to monitor.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just need to add there as well, as we see the fragmentation within Europe is really between sort of the current governments in many countries and the populist movement. So what is the popular support? I mean, it's very interesting to see sort of the popular view on in Europe among different countries, how they see these new movements from the US and whether that will gain support for the populist movements or not. That will be interesting, I think. And also seeing how national governments now will react to this, because I think we will see in terms of energy security, I think we will see different national responses to this rather than waiting for the full strategy from EU, even though I think it will come as well. But I think it will be also a lot of initiatives coming from national governments. Sorry for that, Sid. I'm going to leave it to you now to finish.
Yes. So I think with the past week, there has, of course, been a lot of focus on security from very much security policy perspective. But of course, not losing sight of the markets themselves, I will be watching for how markets react to the various statements that are being made here. We already seen gas prices falling in the past couple of weeks, along with oil prices, as the prospect of a potential ceasefire calms the markets to some extent. I will be watching evolution as it goes on that front.
Yes, and markets are pretty good at picking up these political signals, especially those big markets such as the gas and oil markets. So that is absolutely a good thing to watch if you like to get the sentiment, the political sentiment as well. But with that said, I'd like to thank you all for today, and I'll see you next week again. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.